heartily welcome you all to this presentation. A documentary film by Angel Rose PG studying in 10th standard in teaching VIDYANIKETAN. This film is based on the topic building styles in Asia, Europe and Antarctica. Special thanks to these Google sites and YouTube channels. Architecture styles in the Asian continent. Asian architecture styles have always been influenced by the Western and European designs. They have taken the modern contemporary Western cultures and blended it with the laid-back culture of the Europeans. Architects are now creating designs that were reflected eco-friendly concepts that have become increasingly popular. Asian architecture have managed to blend the culture into modern homes and other structures. Due to the Asia-style architecture's unique history, we can easily recognize the culture that is deeply abundant in their designs. So from the Asian continent, I am taking my own country, India. I am so proud to have been able to take my country. Architecture styles in India. One of the most enduring achievements of Indian civilization is undoubtedly its architecture, which has evolved through centuries as a result of socio-economic and geographical conditions. Different types of Indian architecture styles include a mass of expression over space and a time transformed by the forces of history, considered unique to India. As a result of vast diversities, a vast range of architectural specimens have evolved, retaining a certain amount of continuity across the history. The major type of architecture styles that we found in India are colonial architecture, Indo-Islamic architecture, ancient architecture, cave architecture, rock-cut architecture, and temple architecture. The colonial architecture. Like all other aspects, colonialization in India also had an impact on the architectural styles. With the colonialization, a new chapter in India architecture began. The Dutch, the French and the Portuguese made the presence felt through the building. But it was English who had a lasting impact on the architecture. In the beginning of the colonial rule, there were attempts on creating the authority to classical prototypes. In its later phase, the colonial architecture culminated into what is called the Indo-Saracenic architecture. Indo-Saracenic architecture, which combined the features of Hindu, Islamic and the Western elements. The colonial architecture exhibited through the institutional, civic and utilitarian buildings such as post office, railway stations, restaurants, government buildings, etc. Such buildings began to build in large number over the world empire. The colonial architecture in India followed developments not only from the metropolis, but also took inspiration from the existing architecture in India. The major and the best examples of colonial architecture in our India are St. Thomas Church, Chennai, All Saints Cathedral, Allahabad, St. George Cathedral, Chennai, and the Gold Market, New Delhi. Now, let us look over the Indo-Islamic architecture. The medieval period saw the great developments in the field of architecture. With the coming of Muslims to India, many new features came to be introduced in buildings. The development of Muslim styles of architecture of this period can be called Indo-Islamic architecture or the Indian architecture influenced by the Islamic art. The Indo-Islamic style can neither strictly Islamic or nor strictly Hindu. The architecture of the medieval period can be divided into two main categories. They are the Imperial style architecture and the Mughal architecture. The Imperial style developed under the patronage of the Sultan of Delhi And the Mughal architecture was a blend of Islamic architecture of Central Asia and the Hindu architecture. The best examples of Indo-Islamic architecture are Qutb Minar, New Delhi, Alai Darwaza, New Delhi, Agra Fort, Agra, Taj Mahal, Agra, and Red Fort, New Delhi. Now let us look over the ancient architecture in India. Indian architecture is old as the history of civilization. The earliest remains of the recognizable building activity in the India dates back to the Indus Valley cities. Among the India's ancient architectural remains, the most characteristic are the temple, chaityas, stupas, viharas and other religious structures. In ancient India, temple architecture of high standard developed in almost all regions. The distinct architectural styles of the temple construction in different parts was a result of geographical, climate, ethnic and racial, historical and linguistic diversities. The best and the major example of ancient architecture is Akshardham Temple, Delhi, Virupaksha Temple, Karnataka, Karla Caves, Maharashtra, and Ellora Caves, Maharashtra. Now let us look over the cave architecture. The cave architecture in India is believed to have begun during the ancient time. The caves were used by the Buddhist and the Jain monks as places of worship and residence. Initially, these caves were excavated in the western India. Some examples of this kind of cave architecture are chaityas, viharas of Buddhists, etc. The Great Cave at Karla is also one such example where great chaityas and viharas excavated by hewing out rocks. Best example of cave architecture is Mahabalipuram, Tamil Nadu, Ajanta Caves, Maharashtra, Bhaja Caves, Maharashtra, Bedou's Caves, Maharashtra, and Sittanavasar, Tamil Nadu. Now let us look over the rock cut architecture. The rock cut sculptures present the most spectacular piece of ancient Indian art specimen. Most of the rock cut sculptures were closely associated with the various religions and religious activities. In the beginning, remarkable Buddhist and the Jain rock-cut sculptures were built in the areas such as Bihar in the east, Maharashtra in the west, and the numerous caves were excavated by the Buddhist monks for prayers and residence purposes. The best example of rock-cut architecture is Chaitya and Viharas. Inside the rock-cut sculptures, windows and balconies and gates were carved as huge R-shaped openings. Rock-cut architecture occupies a very important place in the history of Indian architecture. The rock-cut architecture differs from the traditional building in many ways. Rock-cut art is more similar to the sculpture than architecture, as structures were produced by the cutting of solid rocks. Some prominent rock-cut structures of the ancient India are chaityas, viharas, temples, etc. The best example of rock-cut sculptures are Kailasa Temple, Ellora, Pancharatnas, Mahabalipuram, Barbar Caves, Bihar. Now let us look over the temple architecture. In ancient India, temple architecture of high standard developed in almost all regions. The distinct architectural styles of the temple construction in different parts was a result of geographical, climatic, ethnic, racial, historical and linguistic diversities. Ancient Indian temples are classified in three broad types. This classification is based on the different architectural styles employed in the construction. These three styles of the temple are Naghara, the northern style, Dravida, the southern style, and Visada, the mixed style. The best example of temple architecture in our India is Bridaheshwar Temple, Tanjavur, Jagadamba Temple, Madhya Pradesh, Sun Temple, Mathura, Konark Sun Temple, Orissa. Architectural styles in the Europe continent. So from the Europe continent, I like to look over the architectural styles in the Germany. Architectural styles in Germany. Germany is a country of many things, from beautiful lands to high fashion art and architecture. The country witnesses high violence to highly emerging art. They created many histories and as one remarkable in the world. The country is heaven with many architectural styles, from Roman architecture to modern architecture. The architectural styles that we can see mostly in Germany are Baroque architecture, Gothic architecture, Romanesque architecture, Renaissance architecture, and historicism. German Baroque architecture. The Baroque is a period in history started in Italy after Renaissance. It was a new artistic style, defined by the abundant use of ornaments and the combination of different arts. It was first developed with the intention to exhibit the power of Catholic Church to Protestant group. This kind of style started to develop in Germany in the 17th and the 18th centuries. German Baroque took elements from both Italian and French Baroque architecture. As a defining characteristic of this style, buildings show a great exuberance. They were meant to impress and show the powers of either the church or the king. So, they were highly ornamented. Light and dark color marble and jasper often used for the columns, and some pieces of ornaments. Brass embellishment were also common in the interior areas, and plenty of fresh cones were shown on the ceilings and domes. The exterior walls of the Baroque architecture were often made of stone that gives the building an imposing appearance. The influence of the French Baroque was very clear in the design and the construction of German palaces and noble houses. The best example of German Baroque architecture is Charlottenburg Palace. This palace shows a well-defined base level, a noble floor. The building is symmetric with one wing on each side. The center space is given the most importance with an additional level and a tall dome to exhibit the importance of the king. The Swinger Palace. This palace was built as a place for exhibitions and events for court. The layout of the complex is an oval shape enclosing the gardens, and also the exterior facade has abundant sculptures and embellishments. German Gothic architecture. Gothic architecture flourished during the high and late medieval period in the Holy Roman Empire, from approximately 1140 to 1400. The Gothic style first developed in the France territories that constitute modern-day Germany, adopted the French Gothic and developed regional distinction to this style. German Gothic architecture is notable for its enormous doors and spires. Sometimes they were so big that they were left unfinished until the modern times. The spires are quite different than the English spires because they are made a lazy, open fall. There are also many high cars which have no clerestory windows. The nave and the aisles of this Gothic architectural building styles is of same height. Cologne Cathedral in Germany. Cologne Cathedral in Germany is the largest Gothic cathedral in the world. Construction began in 1248 and took with eruptions with until 1818 to complete, a period over 600 years. It is 144.5 meter long, 86.5 meter wide, and its two towers are 157 meters tall. Because of its enormous stone spires, it has the largest facade of any church in the world. Brick Gothic. Brick Gothic is a specific style of Gothic architecture common in northern Germany and the regions around the Baltic Sea that lack natural rock resources. These structures are built more or less using only bricks. The Stralsund City Hall in the Germany and St. Nicholas Church are examples of this kind of Gothic architecture. Hall churches are another example of German Gothic architecture that is distinct from the French Gothic. In hall churches, the aisles and nave have same height, and the stained glass windows are typically the full height of the walls that allow the maximum light and space. German Renaissance Architecture. Renaissance is another European architectural style went and spread to various parts of the world. It influenced Germany at 14th to 16th centuries, like Romanesque and Victorian Renaissance is another architectural style which stands as witness of time. The geometry and symmetry from ancient Greek and Roman architecture is highly used in Renaissance architecture style. Columns, pilasters, and domes with semicircular arches are some of the core characteristics of Renaissance architectural style. The doors, the domes, and the ceiling, along with windows, given priority than anything else. The decoration in both interior and exterior are highly effective. The best example of Renaissance architecture in Germany are St. Michael's Church, Munich, which is one of the fine examples of Renaissance architecture in Germany. Romanesque Architecture. It is one of the Europe's famous and widely organized architecture. By using most of the ancient Roman elements and characteristics being influenced heavily in the architectural philosophy and style, we can witness that majority of cathedrals, symmetries in the Central Europe is one of the Italian Romanesque architecture. In Germany, it made a great impact during the 6th to 11th century, and it leads to the creation of famous architectures in the Romanesque style. The massive quality in the architecture made it enlarged with times, and rapid adoption emerged the thick walls and round arches, along with standard sturdy pillars, made the architecture more beautiful. An astonishing one between the people. The large towers and barrels walls with decorative arcadings even added space to the architectural philosophy much greater and added as its core characteristic. The best example of Romanesque architecture in the Germany are Gemroth Abbey Church, Germany, Lubeck Cathedral, Germany. Historicism. Historicism is a collective architectural style to create the history and re-establish the artisans, painting different elements and create a completely different from the former one. To vernacular. Everything will come under the historicism architecture. Architectural styles in Antarctica. Throughout the 20th century, architecture in Antarctica was a pragmatic and largely makeshift affair, focused on keeping the elements out and the occupants alive. According to the 1959 treaty, the continent is dedicated to research. Since then, the scientists have come in growing number and with ever more complex needs. The mostly seen architectural style in Antarctica are modern architecture, Danish architecture, Antarctican modern architecture. Modern architecture is a change to every architecture found in history. The usage of modern elements like glass and steel influenced highly in the modern architecture, and reinforced concrete acted as another major element being used in the construction. It is one of the ever-long architecture styles in the history, and from the establishment of the modernism, the entire world adapted to it, and even major architectural style used the elements of modern architecture. The 20th century architecture is a revolution in the world of architecture with its material like iron, plate, glass and concrete. It seems to fit with the budget and long-lasting at the same time. The usage of bricks are common and even wood sometimes used according to the region. The rectangular forms with horizontal and vertical lines and flat roofs or broad roofs are some of the core characteristics of modern architecture. The best example of modern architecture in Antarctica are Helifort Research Station. Danish architecture. Danish architecture traces its roots to Viking military encampment and through period of Roman, Gothic, Renaissance and through Baroque styles. In 21st century, Danish architecture has become more popular all over the world. Danish architecture prioritizes natural light, sustainable energy systems for the people who uses the building for their works and for living. Why this difference in architectural styles? An architectural style is a set of characteristics and features that make a building or other structure notable or historically identifiable. It is a subclass of style in the visual arts generally, and most style in the architecture are closely related to contemporary artistic style. A style may include such elements as form, methods of construction, built-in materials, and regional character. Most architects can be classified with a chronology of style, which changes over time, reflects on changing factions and beliefs and religions. Why India has such an architectural styles? We can see many varieties of architectural styles in India. This variation is caused due to geographical, climatic, radical, ethnic, linguistic, and historical diversities in India. Why Germany has such an architectural style? So the architectural style in Germany depends on climate, religion, and historical diversities. Why Antarctica has such an architectural style? Antarctica is the coldest continent on the earth. The average temperature in the interior throughout the year is about minus 57 degrees Celsius, with minimum temperature being minus 90 degrees Celsius during the winter season. Although the coast is warmer and temperature can reach a maximum of between minus 2 degrees Celsius and 82 degrees Celsius during summer. So, the architectural styles in Antarctica completely depend on its climate as well as historical diversities. Thank you for watching.